I think one of the things that actually makes lots of people scared is that not only one thing you have already mentioned, they seem not to have a goal-oriented behavior. And that it's already scary, because if you understand the other people because you understand their goals. I understand that you want to drink if you grasp a glass, right? And this is already scary by itself. The second reason is because they seem to be built for pleasing you. And we are not used to that.
Hi everyone, my name is Balázs Kegel and this is the iScientist podcast where we explore artificial intelligence, the body and the soul. And today it's my great pleasure to introduce Laura Desiree Di Paolo. Laura is a cognitive scientist actually doing her second PhD in cognitive science. How are you today, Laura?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing?
Good, very well, very well. We have a lot of territory to cover because the main topic will be your recent paper, which is called Active Inference Goes to School, which I love the title, by the way.
Thank you. That was mine. The paper was definitely a team and a collaboration, but the title is mine. I am very proud of it.
You should be, because this actually caught my eye. It was Anna Chaunica, who was a previous guest, who actually put it on Twitter, and that's how I got to read it. It's about 4E cognitive science. We'll talk about it. It's about active inference and the free energy principle of Friston, which is usually, used in AI or in the, embodied AI, let's say, as a motivating principle. And we work a lot on trying to fill out the different modules that the free energy principle presumes. But what was interesting in your paper is that it was about the free energy principle and AI, but from another angle. The question was, what does the free energy principle do in real education of kids, and how to use AI with respect to that kind of approach? So we have a lot of territory to but yeah, go ahead. I see you want to say something.
No. First, I always talk too much, so at some point, shut me up. Please do it.
That's never a problem on YouTube.
So we don't think in terms, particularly not in that paper, about the free energy principle, because of course it's there, but it's more the active inference side of the story. And it's kind of a weird background, because I've always worked in learning. So I started with learning monkeys, and then at some point I was more interested in children, and then I moved to schools. And in development, when you look at the, children development, you have always like these two things. On the one hand, the so-called cognitive milestones. So children grows in stages, and they have like this switch on of particular cognitive competencies. But at the same time, they learn throughout all these developmental stages, and learning is essential for having these developmental stages in the first place. But at my knowledge, there has not been a unifying principle, something that would put this, so it looks to me completely absurd in an idea of cognition as a general capacity, etc. The fact that there are two principles that can never combine. And the active inference is one of the few that is actually able to explain these two phynomena at the same time.
You're talking about like the developmental stages a la Piaget?
A la Piaget, but Vygotsky, there is not, but also if you look like infants, like very basic capacities, like capacity to see, capacity to hear, capacity to speak a language, right? we are born with a certain ability to learn a language. We learn some primary languages, let's say up to 3, so to say, that our first languages, and then we can keep learning languages, but it's going to be more difficult and more difficult. What's the main difference between the two? If you think in terms of active inference, it actually makes sense, because you have the construction of a general capacity and then a prediction and a precision mechanism that allows you to refine certain competencies. So when you have to reacquire a new capacity out of the scratch, it's going to be more difficult, obviously, right?
Okay, so let's start. So I was thinking about explaining also 4E cognitive science, because in some sense it frames active inference, but in another sense in the paper I was surprised to read that there are some people who say there are contradictions between those. So let's start maybe, I know 4E cognitive sciences, but its main, let's say, in the AI community, it's perhaps not that well known. So what is 4E cognitive science?
First and foremost, I would say that up to today, we should start to put NE, because if you think if you think it through, is like theoretically, it's the 4E classical approach is embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended. But then how you can rule out things like emotions or education, the role of education, that particularly in Western societies, we are through for a very long period of time, how you can rule out for the people that we are. So the 4E approach is an idea of cognition, for which cognition is not just matter of thinking, but everything that we think, everything that we perceive, everything that we believe is a matter of multiple inputs, if you wish, and multiple complicated, how can I say, complicated link with different aspects. If you think in terms of learning, for instance, children learn from things, children learn from their peers, children learn from their from the parents, children learn from teachers, children learn how to do things, and this means that they have certain aspects of their body that has to do with the way in which they think. That would be, I think, the most basic explanation of 4E cognition.
Okay, so let's maybe explain the 4E. So there is embodied, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of, so embodied means that cognition doesn't only happen in the brain. It's already something strange to say that you have a body and the brain, because your brain is part of your body. But let's say it doesn't happen in the brain, but it happens in the full body, right? So that's the first E.
Yes, and also means, like, for instance, when you grab something, not only the shape of your hand, but the gesture itself, even before becomes the enacted part. So it's very hard for me to detach the different sections. But even before you make the action, the idea simply to grab an object or to drink, for you to think about something that contains a liquid, it's already an embodied form of cognition, the idea that you have to grasp these things.
Yes, and this is pretty much supported also by recent biology, like Michael Levin's stuff, where you cannot really know where the brain ends and where your body starts if you want to separate the two. Like all the cells basically have the same mechanism of transmitting information and participating in your cognition. So that's the embodied
the
part.
Neuronal part. But I remember my professor of neuroscience, actually of animal behavior at university, used to say that we have two brains. One is the one that we normally consider a brain in the skull, and the other one is the one that regulates our hormonal system. How you can take the two apart is impossible.
Yeah, and the immune system too.
Exactly, the gut. I mean, then you can keep adding. That is the reason why I started saying there is a NE cognition at this point.
Yes. And so the second E, perhaps for the most important for this discussion, is the enacted part. So it's not, and that's so important from AI, because most of the time when people, there are LLMs, there is language models, there is this, GPT, and there is all these beautiful things it can do in a sort of symbolic space. But it turns out that it's very far from what we can do, because we actually enact our intelligence. It's not something that we just, watching at the world passing by, either by reading text or watching videos, because this seems to be like, the next big step. These AIs will also be fed videos, but they are still not enacting anything. They are just somebody like completely paralyzed and watching videos from the internet, and it's still not it, right? Intelligence has to be enacted.
Yes, and also because most of our intelligence, also the ones that might come in a symbolic form, it comes from enacted experiences. That was also the whole part about the paper. Even when we think about mathematics, a kid doesn't learn mathematics because he wants to learn about 5 plus 5, but because 5 plus 5 makes sense in our world. So he can enact this kind of ideas. Sorry, I always talk about kids because it's the main topic. Doesn't have to be this way, but as I said before, the mirror neurons, I don't know if you have ever read the very first paper about the mirror neurons, and was about a monkey that in which neurons, whose neurons fired seeing the experimenter. It was in Italy, right? The Fogassi group taking an espresso cup. And of course, this is a form of embodied enaction, if you want, because it had to make sense for fire. So for that monkeys that had seen this action, that might recognize what the action means, at that point, the neuron fires because it predicts the action of the experimenter.
Like drinking.
The drinking, yes. But
It's so interesting. I didn't know
simply
this.
in the grasping. So for me, grasping is very important because we work a lot on in our big study that's material minds. We work a lot on artifacts. And for instance, when you think about a simple gesture like grasping a glass, so and then you think how many different glasses we have and how much the glass somehow as in the shape as encoded and offloaded part of your enaction, so suggests you how it wants to be taken. So if you have a Merlot glass, for instance, or you have a cup, your gesture and your understanding of your gesture will be completely different.
Yet the mirror neurons fire in the same way. Like it's
This I honestly don't know, because the point is that for me, and this is something that I've always like kind of puzzled me about the first experiments of mirror neurons that were done with macaques, mostly like classical experimental settings, like sat on a chair and in a sort of children chair and with the skull open and all the electrodes inside. How for the macaque makes sense something like drinking from an espresso cup. It makes sense because it's embedded, and we have the third E, it's embedded in a context in which a certain gesture is connected with a certain meaning.
It's amazing. So actually this is not some kind of mechanistic mirroring. The meaning has to propagate up in the brain of the monkey, right? To hit the part where the gesture actually has a meaning.
In terms of active inferences, might be again, it might be a prediction that's refined all the time. So you refine all the time, you know the gesture of drinking, you see the people, you might have experience, you have the smell, you have, you can read the people somehow. Again, my professor of ethology used to say, animals are the best ethologists of human beings that you can find. They are very good observer, they can get the details, so might have refined this ability to predict what is going to happen on that particular object, for which the simple beginning of the enaction of the activity already means something.
Yeah, and it has to connect to something that's meaningful for the animal.
Yes.
If I start, I don't know, typing on the keyboard, probably, I don't know,
Yes.
maybe it will be meaningful in some way, but probably not in the way it's meaningful for us, right?
Very likely not, but there was some years ago, David Levens, that is a primatologist, also at the University of Sussex, and he wrote a beautiful paper about pointing in apes, particularly in chimpanzees, because apes in nature, they don't seem to use this gesture. They don't use this gesture. Of course, they have a particular walking style that prevents them to use the hands for this kind of information, but they do if human raised, so raped. So if they have been so if they have developed in an environment in which a certain gesture makes sense, they might understand the gesture, they might use the gesture, they might connect a meaning with the gesture. It's the same, like for instance, in the paper, we quote this, which I find a wonderful experiment with the 3-month-old infants that have, they don't understand goal-directed gesture in other people, of course, because they don't have like a direct experience of grasping, or they don't have this grasping ability yet. But if you put little mittens with Velcro, for which they can grasp toy, or better, the toys can stick to the mittens, and then they see an experimenter doing the same with the same kind of gloves, then they will understand it, because the action and the ability to do something makes also you able to understand things.
Amazing, and it's very soon in the developmental phases,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So just to finish the four, so the
Sorry.
two other is no, it's okay. There are a lot of things to talk about, but let's finish this part. So the embedded part means that cognition doesn't happen in isolation, right? We're always embedded in a context, embedded in society, embedded in an environment which participates in the cognition.
Look, I can, the best way for me, it's to refer to other two theories, if you wish, for understanding the embedding. One is the theory of scaffolding, and one is the theory of distribution. And if you want to refer to some like theories, one is Kim Sterelny for the scaffolding part, and the one would be, and I love his paper, Richard S. Erzming, I hope I don't mispronounce his name, about distribution. The idea here is like everything that we do has a certain outcome that might be not our own outcome, might be leftovers of our activities in a way that connected with niche construction, with a bunch of other stuff, but otherwise I can go very far, for which we change the environment that surround us. This changed environment, of course, feedback on us. We tend to get, if you want, in evolutionary terms, we tend to get adapted to a certain environment while we change the environment at the same time. So we use every object, everything. When you go in your home, and let's imagine that an evil genius has arrived just 10 minutes before you and puts all your things, but just in a slightly different way from where you had left them, you will recognize it. And the reason is because it's not your home anymore. It's not your embedding, not the place in which you feel yourself.
Yes,
So
and then we
somehow,
will come back to this in the active inference, because actually
yes.
manipulating the environment is a very important part of it. So the last one is extended, and so these two actually, embedded and extended, for me, they are relevant for AI because, not because AI has that particular property, but because AI is part of our environment, and this is how we will sort of like get it in the paper, how to use AI in an education environment. So extended means, for me at least, is that we use stuff to extend our cognition, like writing, internet, uh, even before, the objects that you're talking about. Like, objects can represent stuff that we don't store in our memory. We sort of outsource our memory into the environment, and they become part of, like, the triggers that you can use to bring up something. And from this point of view, AI is very interesting, because basically, for me, LLM became part of our extended cognition. They are not yet
Not yet. So
conscious, but they are part of the
it's
extended
quite curious,
cognition.
because now we are working on so I am working on two different papers on extended cognition. One, I'm working with the same author, so this paper, but this time I'm not the first author, and we are talking, we are analyzing TXM, so extended mind, the thesis of extended mind in ambient smart environments. Ben White is the genius behind this kind of stuff. And the other, instead, I'm still working on development and education, and looking at the difference, because what you said, it's not yet. So the point is that there are certain rules, if you wish, that certain devices have to have for being considered part of our extended cognition, so extra bodily element, one of which has to be trustworthy. I use LLMs a lot. I don't use them for work. I use them for check for mistakes. But if I would write the same, I tried to put a little piece of the paper that we have just published, and inside Bard, both Bard and ChatGPT, and what came out was completely nonsense. It made up completely from the scratch, because nobody had tried to put the active inference into schools before. So it gave it for granted it was a complete, given research line, and made up complete results. It was very funny, I have to say.
It's very interesting. I know I have exactly the same experience. Like, we were writing a paper on embodied AI. It's finished. And I was looking for references and for certain text. I knew what I was looking for. Certain others I was less sure. And GPT was pretty good at giving me pointers that actually were relevant. But like, every 10th or 20th BibTeX entry was completely
Nonsense.
non-existent. Like, the authors existed, some of them never worked together. The paper existed, but it wasn't the same authors, and it wasn't relevant to. So then, I had to go to, Google Scholar each time, because I wanted to check whether the thing existed and read it.
I always check, but it was, for me, was pretty funny at some point. I don't remember what I was writing, but that was the point in which for me was clear how much prompt engineering and how much checking of fact you have to do with these kind of artificial intelligences. Because I was looking for something, and it had to do with Kim Sereni. Now, I know Kim very well for more than 10 years now. I know practically everything that he has written. And at some point, I think it was ChatGPT 4, and he suggested me a book that apparently he had written like 2 or 3 years ago. I said, but this book doesn't exist. I'm pretty sure of that.
But maybe it's the book he should write, right?
Yes, yes.
So
It was very plausible.
exactly. And so, I mean, this is a parenthesis on hallucination or confabulation of LLMs. I actually wrote a blog post on this, because I think we do it too. Like, it's a basic functionality of our brain to always project novelty and try to combine stuff that don't exist yet. So
if the active inference framework is right, at the end of the day, we are generative models.
Exactly, of things that don't yet exist. If we couldn't do that, then we couldn't create, right?
Yes.
So, and in this sense, LLM is very human for me, in that, of course, it generates things that don't exist because it's new text. Nobody ever written it, right? In that order, in that way. And it's probabilistic. So why would we expect that it always says only things that are facts and that are true? And so what I find important is that we check it. And we, as an embodied agent, we have the capacity to verify our thoughts or the veracity of our thoughts, or try to create stuff. It doesn't work, we feed it back into the model. We talk about this. And so I'm a little bit surprised when you said that because of this untrustfulness, we cannot really say that LLMs are.
No, because that's his part of. So when you think about, of course, if I compare me with my daughter, we would consider trusting devices very different ones, right? But when something is part of your extended cognition, at least in line of principle, then there are 3 different ways. It's a very complicated topic. Now we can stay for the next 2 hours just talking about that. You have to think about devices that actually do what they are supposed when they are supposed. That's the reason why behind pen and paper. Today is Google. There is, I think in 2011 came out this beautiful paper. It's called The Google Effect. And the first thing that they mentioned, I remember that when I read it the first time, I was very critical toward the paper, because what they mentioned was kind of we are losing memory because we rely on Google. Instead, how I read the effect is like, no, we are not. We have learned where and how to search for certain information, right?
Okay, I get it.
For my daughter, all these books that might be part of my extended mind, because for me, they are very trustworthy. I have them, I know where to search and so on. For her, they make no sense. For her, it's just Google. She doesn't even think of Google. She thinks just of the smartphone, and she thinks about this little thing in which she can search whatever crosses her mind.
Yeah,
so
okay,
it has to be, I mean, printers for me are very weird cases, because we keep using them, but they are very untrustworthy.
Printers, you mean the machine?
Yes, the machines, yes. It's not that I'm using them. It was one of the first things that I got rid of, printing stuff. But they have always been very untrustworthy.
Yeah, I mean, that just shows how complicated is the physical world. Actually,
Yes.
it's on the topic, because it's easy to manipulate symbols in a software, but once you put it in a robot, it's going to be another
thing. Yes.
Another thing, yeah, and that's why I'm less afraid of this singularity type of things, because I don't think it will get to there without embodiment, and embodiment will slow everything down. So we'll have time to adapt, but that's another.
I don't know. I mean, I have seen since the beginning of LLMs, or since in the past, I would say 3-4 years, roundabout, people have an insane, and in my personal opinion, unjustified fear of them, which might be that I am a sci-fi fan, and if you grow up with something like Battlestar Galactica, you understand that there is always like a part of embodiment that is necessary. In the moment in which we can put something like a LLM within a robot like torso, and we will have, or something like some of the robots from Boston Dynamics, and we have all of these working like a clock, then we might have to rethink what cognition is. But till that point, I think it's very much enacted, embedded, and so on and so forth.
Actually, again, a parenthesis. I mean, this conversation will go
It is a conversation, pure conversation. Yeah.
While I was writing part of this embodied AI paper, I started to think about embodiment and internet AI like LLMs, but also social media AI like recommender systems. And it's a hypothesis, but it feels to me that the reason why LLMs are so scary is precisely because of the lack of embodiment.
Yes.
And in a certain sense, social media AI, which is, if you don't know, it's behind all the content recommendation. So every feed you get is driven by AI today, and it learns. It has a much more specific goal than LLMs, which LLMs' goal, if any, is just to generate a plausible next word, or maybe to satisfy, because now we have reinforcement learning at the end of the training, so a little bit of goal orientation, but not much. Whereas in social media AI, it's a pure goal of catching your attention or whatever the social media company wants to optimize.
Yes, of course.
It's very personalized. It adapts to your habits, your what you like, and so there is a more natural relationship between us and the social media AI than between us and the LLM, which confabulates. It's weird. It's not a search engine. It's not also not some purely creative machine.
I think one of the things that actually makes lots of people scared is that not only one thing you have already mentioned, they seem not to have a goal-oriented behavior, and that it's already scary, because if you understand the other people because you understand their goals. I understand that you want to drink if you grasp a glass, right? And this is already scary by itself. The second reason is because they seem to be built for pleasing you. And we are not used to that. In the first version of the paper, there is a beautiful paper that came out in which the authors compared the children and LLMs on creation and understanding of loopholes. Do you know what loopholes are? Loopholes, like I give you an example because it's very hard for me to define it, but it's like when you tell to a child, eat up your peas before dessert, and the child take 2 peas, eats 2 peas, and says, okay, now I want the dessert. Okay, I am a mom, trust me, happens every day. And children are incredibly good. In this paper, they claimed LLMs couldn't do. And at the beginning, when in the first version of the paper, they actually couldn't do. Then we had feedback from the reviewers, so was for me, like already 3 months later, I managed to have ChatGPT-4, I think, creating a loopholes. The difference was that for it to create a loopholes, I had to precisely, me and a friend of mine that is way more experienced with me than me with AI, we had to specifically say, okay, we want loopholes and we want you to behave like a child. And it did it precisely, was perfect, but it had to be instructed exactly in this way. While children, for instance, they do all the time, but because they want something without giving you what you want, which is exactly the opposite behavior, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not so surprised that LLMs are so alien, but I think the fear is generated by their alienness, whereas social media AI is much more transparent. At the same time, its influence on society is way more profound than LLMs today. Yet there is much less talk about aligning, recommendation machines because they don't seem to bother people. Like
No, because they use also, if I remember correctly, I had a friend of mine that, like, I'm talking 15 years ago, this point, she is a designer of websites. And already at that time, they were implementing, of course, not so settled on each user, but they were implementing ways for understanding well where the users in general, at least the majority of users, would click in a way that they could put the advertisement in certain areas of the screen. The social media, at the end of the day, they use the AI for something that we are already used to.
exactly.
They want us to buy things. They want us to see things. They want us to do things, and something that somehow we expect.
Yes, exactly.
Having a machine or whatever it is, an entity, I call them entity because I don't know what they are, the LLMs, so I call them entities. That instead wants to please you is, I don't know, it's without words.
It's I mean, the closest one is for me is sociopath.
Yes.
Like somebody who wants to please you too, but there
All
is
the time.
always something behind. So I think we actually get paranoid about this and
Yes.
project stuff into LLMs and what it wants, you know?
What it wants,
And
what
then
is
that's
real
like,
aim.
say it again?
What it is, it's real aim, because that is the
Yeah,
point.
exactly. And
If
that's
I
like
meet
an
a
empty
person,
screen where
exactly.
you can project everything. So this is, but to be serious, I think the experience with social media AI also points towards how alignment should be. So it will be much easier to align a robot
Mm-hmm.
or an organism which has some AI in it than such an alien thing as an LLM, which we try to basically align propositionally by rules, you know. And if you have
Mm-hmm.
kids, you know that doesn't work. You
It
know,
doesn't work, yes.
you want to align your kid, it's not the
Never.
rules that will do it. You know?
Never.
Anyway, okay.
Okay.
So let's talk about
Let's
okay,
go
not
back to the
synergistic
paper.
principle, but active inference. So what is active inference and how does it relate to 4E?
So this was a very big topic for us, because for me it was kind of a surprise, because I am not in the paper. I have to admit, the part of active inference is more Avel and Ben and Axel and of course Andy. It was surprising for me, thinking that there were people that consider active inference not for E, because for me it's impossible to think the two things together, because of course if you think at our cognitive system or whatever system we are as a form of prediction and a form of error minimization, of course it's embodied, of course it's enacted, of course it's embedded, because everything, it doesn't make sense to think us without our environment. And of course, it might be extended. It might be the only thing that maybe might not completely fit, but for the particular requirements that the proper extension requires, which is you have so much familiarity, so to say, with a certain device that, like, for instance, when you have to make very complex mathematics, you don't think to make them on pen and paper anymore. You think about which program you use. You do that if you are a mathematician. Okay, you don't think in terms of, you think already in terms of tools that you use, and you think together with the tools. I don't know for you, but I think writing, this is a form of extended cognition. And of course, at that point, what I write is part of my own embedding. It's part of my own environment. It feedbacks on me. It gives me the same kind of prediction error that I would experience in normal life. So in it's embodied because I feel it. when I
Yeah,
write.
yeah. And so, but let's go back to, because for me, error minimization is not necessarily embodied. Like LLM is doing error minimization. So let's maybe let's.
I agree. It's not necessary. In us, it is. In us, is very much so. That's I think it's one of the main difference. You feel that you have made a mistake. You feel, or acting into the word, it's obvious that you have made a mistake because there is a disalignment between your prediction and how the word looks like.
Yes, but for me, the difference is like between, like, let's say how the LLMs are trained and how we learn is not necessarily the error minimization. We both try to minimize prediction error, but the importance that we assign to the error. Like, I might not know what is the color of the brick in the wall because it's painted, and it's not an information that is important for my survival. Yeah, the AI that we train doesn't know which instance or which piece of text is important because it doesn't have a stake in, let's say, survival. It doesn't have a stake in any goal. So it takes every information we give them and it's sort of like a flat value.
But
There's no
again,
hierarchy.
again, I have to say, in this case, it's the fact that we are embodied and embedded, so we are multisensory systems. Our error minimization doesn't work on just one at a time. It works on many. You can hear cat in the room, but not seeing it, not smelling it, but you can hear it. So you have at the same time multiple like systems that might be contradictory. One gives you an error and the other one doesn't, and then you have to decide between between all of them, and this LLM doesn't do,
Yes,
because it
but it's
doesn't
still,
have
you know,
all these.
because it's coming, the multimodal
It's
stuff
coming,
is
yes,
coming, and it's
it's coming.
still, you know, there's a big hope that that will lead to AGI when we add video and add, I don't know, smell or touch, but it still doesn't give you a hierarchy of importance of what you have to know. And formally, for me, this manifests in how the data is collected on which we train AI and how the data is collected on which we learn. So if we really have to do some reductionist move and dissect it, then you can, let's say, separate an intelligent being's behavior of collecting data and learning. Let's say it's two different modules, but the way we collect the data, it's also goal oriented. We don't collect just data because somebody gives it to us, but we go after.
That's, I think it's on this. I am not sure. I think we collect a bunch of data we collect data while we are goal oriented on something. Let's make the case at school. I don't know how was your schooling period. Mine was terrible. That's the reason I'm working on school, right? And I remember that I learned a lot in school, all but what I was supposed to learn, because my focus, my attention, all my attempt to focus was goal oriented. I want to listen to these lessons, but everything else was there. I kept perceiving with like just a little bit on the back what my classmates were doing on the right side, and I was hearing outside other kids playing, and all this kind of information. You collect them. They don't have to have any necessity, neither for survival nor for immediate goal-oriented behavior, but you anyway collect them. And we do all the time. We do
Okay, I would
all
still
the
say
time.
that of course because exploration, so collecting data for which we don't yet know the use, is part of what we need to do to survive in an environment where there are unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
So there are things that I don't
It
know.
might always happen that there is a predator arriving from the back, and I have
Exactly.
to be.
But still, the data we collect is also embodied in the sense that I have to be there, I have to turn my attention to something, and that mechanism, there is a attention mechanism in LLMs, but it's something different, right?
Different. Yes.
It's sort of similar with respect to the goal of predicting the next word, but this is a very weird goal. And for us, when we collect data, we have to be there.
It's also weird to call it a goal in the first place.
Yeah.
It's
Yes, yeah. I mean,
my
it's
goal
like
is to
formally a
predict
goal.
the
Yeah.
next word. Yes.
Yeah. So, but it's very interesting that you brought up school, because when I read your paper, I immediately thought that I mean, classical, traditional, I don't know, 19th century school is typically how we train LLMs.
Yes.
There is an oracle, the teacher, and it puts information in our head somehow.
I was very surprised because when we started I started to work with the others, and of course I was all into schools and education. Then we started to write the paper, and there was Ben, my friend, that started to say, yes, we have to, because it's an identical training program. It's the same. It's not exactly the same because, of course, but also because today's schools are not what they were 20 years ago. And but in my opinion, they still, at least traditional mainstream schools, they still have certain elements that makes the comparison not too how can I say, not too wild, not
yeah,
too...
and it's both are like sort of based on the mechanistic worldview, where we are white pages you can write on us, and we go to school to get the right information.
It's think about so you go to school, you're a student, you have a teacher that prepares the curriculum, tells you something. What's your job at the end? It's at the end of the day, your goal is predicting the next word. So rephrasing or paraphrasing exactly what the teacher says, because they will understand that you understood the subject if you are able to express the same subject in different words, which is not very different from me going in front of ChatGPT and ask them to rephrase one paragraph. Right?
And of course, this is destroyed by LLMs, right? Because
yes, exactly.
Just... Oh man, okay. So let's go back a little bit to active inference, because actually I found it's a very short description in your paper, but it's beautiful and very easy to understand. So if anybody needs to know what it is and how it's related to AI and to education, it's a very good summary. And so basically the idea is that you have these conscious entities, like or organisms, that are separated from the environment, and they have to survive physically in the environment. So they build a model, right? They build a model to try to predict what will happen if they do certain actions. It's very in AI, it's very similar to what we do in model-based reinforcement learning. So we build this predictive model, and what free energy principle adds to this is that the kind of actions we do are, okay, of course we want to reach goals, like we want to keep ourselves in the right temperature, we have to eat, we drink, etc.
We want to keep ourselves alive, fundamentally.
Yes, but there's also like a sort of meta goal or secondary goal, is which you keep your model fit to the environment. So when you have an error in your prediction, then you get alert and you have to do something, and typically you can learn. That means you reset or adjust your predictive model.
Adjust your prediction, yes.
But what is super interesting to me, that there is also a second kind of action which we usually don't consider in AI, which is you change the environment.
Yes.
So you basically,
it makes even more sense in humans, obviously.
Yeah, you build a city, right?
Yes, exactly. If I cannot walk in a field, I build a street.
And that's a very interesting, like metaphysically interesting way to keep your model aligned with reality, because we wouldn't consider the part which is not described by our model, not reality. Like the forest is also reality, not only the city. Yet you don't have to care if you manage to build a city and live in it. And that's
Yeah.
such an interesting thing, because it's it questions really what is, because this model is supposed to be our model of of reality. So if metaphysically you imagine that there is some objective reality out there, this move of rebuilding your environment is really weird, no?
It's not just about environments, but again, still, because we are all inside this big project that's called Escape, we think a lot in terms of artifacts, and you build artifacts exactly because you don't want to prove wrong your predictions. You build artifacts. I don't want to think that my wine tastes bad because it didn't have enough oxygen. I build a glass in which the wine won't taste bad because I want to taste good wine. Or I don't know, when you invent the old-fashioned glasses, you do because you want to have drinks made in a certain way. So most of our artifacts are attempts to make our predictions somehow true. And this is, so it's not just in terms, because very often, like, we think in terms of macro environments, we build a city. The landscape is very important, but it's also meant of little changes that make, or every little change that makes your life easier is an attempt to make your predictions true.
Mm. But this truth is weird, no? Because this truth is really pragmatic. This truth is about how
Um,
how good
why
am I
is it
using
weird?
the model to achieve a goal.
I don't see that we can use true, but simply unchallenged would be the right word, I think, because so I don't see it problematic. I see it pretty straightforward to me, at least.
No, I mean it's problematic if I come from a physicalist metaphysics, because there it's weird that there are certain truths which we can ignore.
The, you know, if we could go a little bit back in biology and thinking about the theory of Umwelt. The theory of Umwelt is practically the idea that we don't, if you think us and different species, me and my cats, we live the same apartment, but my Umwelt is very different from their Umwelt, and my surrounding, what they perceive in my flat, is very different from what they perceive in my flat. Because there is always a part of reality that we simply don't perceive. If we don't perceive it, we don't act on it. It doesn't, fundamentally, it's like not existing till the point in which it starts existing again, or it starts existing for the first time. So I don't see, I've simply always given that for granted, if you want, if you wish, because if you come from animal studies, you understand that there are so many levels of reality that you will never perceive if you don't build the right tools for perceiving them.
Okay, but what does it tell about the reality that we don't perceive, you know?
Uh, I don't know. It's like classical Nagel problem.
Yes.
If what it is to be a bat, I don't know. I wish I was, but I'm not. Um,
Uh-huh.
depends.
Okay. Okay, but
For
okay, but I was thinking more about like in the developmental terms, so not things that we never can perceive, but like there are stuff that a child cannot perceive, and then later he can, right? So there
because
is a
we
sort
learn,
of,
yes,
yeah,
because you learn, and in active
exactly.
inference terms, you make more precise your predictions, adapting on specific circumstances. Still, as we said before, I speak a little German, but I'm not German. I have built a generative model that makes me able to interact in a German environment. Still, I don't think as a German. I have some words that have a specific meaning, but I speak mainly Italian and English. And my words, also my imagination is dominated by these two languages. So this is part of the fact that this is, I think it's the big thing of the inference, because when you think about development, it's always not just development in terms of cognitive capacities, but also development in terms of physical capacities.
Yeah.
The more you use a certain language, the more your vocal cords, for instance, are trained for pronouncing certain phonemes. So it will become more and more difficult to acquire different phonemes, or even to listen to them, to hear them in the first place. When you learn a new language, languages, it's the easier example, because when you learn a new language, particularly a language that's very different from your primary language, you are not able to detach the words. It's just like a long song. We can learn, certainly. We can be also very good in it. Depends on the people. I'm terrible in languages, but because we can build this generative model again, but you might never be very good because you are not embedded, embodied, and acting within an environment in which the language that you acquire makes sense. It has a repetition and so on and so forth. So
Okay, so maybe this is the time when we can go to the child development and how active inference is relevant to that. Because you said in the beginning that for you this is like an overarching framework in which you can put the various stages nicely.
Yes, because the point is that you don't think in terms, you don't only put the stages, but you put the inter-individual differences, because you have always, like, in terms of development, you have always, as I told you, these two ways. You have to grow the ability to recognize yourself with the mirror. First part, you have the ability to social cognition. You have certain mechanisms that, like, steps that you have to arrive to. And then at the same time, everybody does these things in different way, slightly different way, more or less at the same time, right? But not exactly. And some kids are better in some things and worse in other things, and the same when we are adults. With a principle like the active inference, and you think about a very simple prediction, precision, error minimization, exploration, and go on. And every time in this way, you can, and that works on cognitive as well as physical, the things, they go very nicely together, because it's not that we build up a certain, a little bit like in Vygotskian fashion, if you want. It's not that we build up certain capacities because we are in a vacuum. We build certain capacities because we are embedded in a sociocultural environment in which certain capacities, more or less, the environment press them on us. So our environment is scaffolded in a way that makes for us easier to develop certain capacities at a certain age. When you go to a children's shop, you will have the toys that are between 0 and 3, between 4 and so on. Also, if you think in historical terms, and this is like a curiosity that when I talk about, people are very surprised. The invention of childhood, it's very recent. It was born in the 19th century in the UK. Before that period, of course, there were children. But the idea that childhood was a period in which children learn, in which children play, in which children make mistakes, was not considered. Children were very good workers that could do things that adults couldn't do. They were very badly paid. They were working in the fields. The idea of childhood, it's like, it's when the first room for children was invented. It was like middle of 19th century, roundabout, which means yesterday in evolutionary perspective. So
it's interesting. I mean, it reminds me to integral psychology. I don't know if you know that Ken Wilber's stuff, where it's built on Piaget's 5 levels, but there are 5 more levels in adult, more spiritual levels. But the interesting thing that reminded me was that he also talks about the historicity of this, how humanity went through stages where certain developmental stages were considered adult, like tribal and before tribal, you know, and the authoritarian
yes,
developmental phase, which was fit for, like, I don't know,
there is
the
there are
Egyptian
the
society
studies.
3,000 years ago. So that sort of reminded me, like we had to stop at a certain developmental phase because society was built like that.
If you wish, yes. There are also, like, for me, the interesting comparison would be with hunter-gatherer societies. And if you look at the studies, I think the first paper ever published that was talking about teaching in hunter-gatherer society was 2011, if I'm not mistaken, between 2010 and 2011. One of the first. And the reason is because in hunter-gatherer societies, or in many, for instance, also South American societies, people are not considered, so children are not considered able to understand before they turn 12. So before they go in puberty period. Before that period, they are not directly taught. The society is as such for which children learn from an embedded environment, from a scaffolded environment. Children learn doing things, playing with leftovers, in which there is not a structured way to teach. And at that point, what would you say that the development, the stage starts when children have like 12 years of age, and before that you don't have anything, because the society is as such for which they are not requested to give you, for instance, explanations, or the parents to give them explanations for things. And these, for instance, with inductive inference, you can explain very, very clearly. How do you explain these different things? They can arrive to our, like, independently of the society in which you grow. You can arrive to be a very smart person, but with different ideas of, for instance, studies on Asian cultures about self-recognitions. If I remember correctly, because studies that I read some years ago, dependently of which kind of environment you had, you could perceive, so American and in general Western raised people tend to recognize their image in just 1 second. Even if compared with, for instance, the image of a familiar one, a familiar person. People that have been raised in a different kind of cultural environment, like Asian ones, instead they take a little bit more time, because their idea of themselves, and you know because you practice martial arts, is very much an idea of community. You know, your position in relation to the people that surround you, right? How do you explain this little difference? With deductive inference, you can.
So how? Tell me.
Well, it's very simple. It's very simple. It's at the end of the day, it's always the same process. You have a generative model. Your generative model is within an environment, the environment gives you the right feedback or the wrong feedback.
Okay.
If it is an error, you go back, you revise, and you make it all the time more precise. So you will be, in our societies, Western society, you will be so much oriented to recognize yourself, have your mother that puts you in front of the mirror and tells you, oh, this is you, oh. In different societies in which this kind of embedding doesn't exist, you develop it a little bit different.
Okay, I got it. So, okay, but that's, do we need active inference to explain this? I mean, it makes a lot of sense that if you grow up in a different environment, you'll become different.
Yes, but how do you explain it in a cognitive? At my knowledge, for instance, the stages of Piaget, of which I'm not a fan because they are very much,
Western.
yes, like packages, little packages.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Or like all maps, yeah, like
You have
categories, yeah.
acquired the ability to think abstractively. That
Whatever.
is the reason why we talk about Montessori in the paper, because instead
Okay.
for Montessori, she said, well, depends the kind of environment you build for the kids. If you build, if you design objects that makes the kids able to do, to understand abstraction, they are 2 years old, they will understand abstraction. They will understand their own way to understand abstractions because there is not just a way, but they will do it. And I am always kind of critical when you see kids, particularly as a mom, I see many kids and they are all different. And there is no way in which you can explain that with just one tier development. Up to today, in my opinion, the active inference is the only one that for me makes sense. It doesn't focus only on learning. It doesn't focus only on cognition. It doesn't focus only on biology, because when we are organisms, so we have all of them.
So one of the things that came out for me was pretty interesting is that when we learn, there is a sort of like a meta goal or meta reward, which is, okay, I have my predictive model, it has some errors, and then I go out and face those errors and update the model. And if this updating happens faster than I thought it would, I'm happy. And sort of like it pushes me to learn, almost like
I
into
would
flow.
take off the word reward, because
Okay,
the
okay.
point is exactly that. So I have read some papers about somehow a reward system that's compatible with the active inference. But the point is that uh, thinking as I think active inference in terms of development and in terms of then that feedbacks on education, the reward is in the action itself. You are not rewarded because you are looking for a certain goal, but what you are doing is the goal.
Interesting.
That is the main, I think, the main, or because you want to achieve something. So it might be also a reward, but like when you study something that's complicated and it might be boring, if you really want to understand something else, so if you really are oriented toward the reasons why you are studying what you are studying, you don't feel what you are studying as complicated or boring because you really want to know. So yes, we can talk in terms of rewards, but I think it's a little bit different, particularly if we think in terms of action and in terms of schoolings, because rewards always like makes thinking about the good grades at the end of the day.
I see. I didn't mean it by that way, but just like if I can update my model and the update is faster than I thought it would be, I'm happy. And sort of like I
Yes,
go
yeah.
into that direction of learning, and it pushes me to learn, and it's puts me on. It reminded me to flow. I don't know if it's related, but it seems.
Yes, yes, it's the emotional aspect connected with the fact that we are embodied system within
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
things, and the fact that when we learn things and it's easy and fun, our we actually learn.
It's not necessarily easy because I think flow requires that it to be hard, but not
Not too hard.
impossible.
It
Yeah,
has to be
yeah,
inside the Goldilocks
yeah, yeah, yeah.
zone. It has to be hard but not challenging, but not too much. It has to be achievable. Uh, so it's a very complicated point of that is the reason why it's called Goldilocks zone, because it
Yeah,
has
yeah,
to
yeah.
be unachievable difficulties, something that you can overcome in some ways.
So somehow good schools like Montessori are trying to do this like learning path. What it's called? There was a terminology for this. I don't remember. It makes path where kids can go through in a way that they learn the
It's
fastest.
called it's the classical terms of the Montessori. It's the prepared environment for
Exactly. Yeah.
the classrooms. Okay, again, active inference, it has four principles and four main principles. It has two, but let's make it four. Prediction, error minimization, explorative behavior, and precision, right? And Montessori has roughly the same.
I see.
Montessori, it sets on so the beginning of the story is like there is not growing or learning without the other. You grow and learn together. This is a very, for me, particularly that I work on educational systems, is a particularly interesting concept because sometimes when you think about schools, you send your kids there, you think that they have to learn or to acquire certain competencies. You are not thinking that they are growing together with them, upon them. Second, it's settled environment because no cognition exists outside of an embedding. Second, it's settled environment in a way that you can make more precise your predictions given the physical collocation of materials or the way in which you navigate into your structured world. And at the same time makes it easier for you to understand how things are connected to one another because are distributed within the environment. So your knowledge is in the environment itself. How you put the books. It's like, how can I say it? For me, it makes lots of sense. It's not, as I said, it's not the only good method. There are many methods that are very good, in my opinion. Most of them are alternative, so-called alternative schools. It's the one that most specifically has to do with cognition. So it's specified the environment, how it should look like, why and how I use certain tools, the material, the tools, how they have to be structured, which size, which weight, and all these kind of things. Since we are Fourier agents, they make sense.
I see. So I think the last part of the paper is about how AI could be used in these environments for
Uh,
helping learning, right?
so, so the point is, when we were thinking about writing the paper, because it's part of a special issue on philosophical transactions of the Royal Society, it was about LLMs and Fourier cognition. And we wanted to talk about education. And I'm not, contrary to many others, I'm not particularly scared about new technologies, whatever they are. And my first thing is like, how do we learn them? How do we learn to deal with them? Because they exist, they will be used. Now we can like put under the carpet, pretend that they don't exist, and we keep going with schools and so on as we do, or we make a good use of them. Looking at most of the papers that I could actually read on implementations in schools or attempts of implementations and so on, what emerged was, again, a sort of fear and the idea that you need to have a system that allows prompt engineering and fact checking. So you need to be sure that who uses LLMs is able to do what you do, what I do, going on Google Scholar and see if the things that LLMs has given to me are actually existent in the first place. But I think we can do more because they are powerful entities. Yeah, it's very hard for me to define them. And I think in an idea of schools in which pupils are somehow educated to think by themselves, to never trust any source, but always to control the source, to see how the things are related to one another, this is the best case scenario for using tools or entities or whatever they are that have such a, I think, very dramatic power. Like if you think about of course, we couldn't talk about everything, but if you think about the ability to learn second, a third language, to work in a second. I can write formal German emails without looking too stupid, which is amazing, thanks to LLMs. I use it for correcting when I make mistakes. I try to understand how to make my own mistakes, so how I can avoid certain mistakes and things as such. And this could be, in my opinion, the best case scenario.
Yeah, I had a guest actually who works in writing education in the US, Joe Glad.
Yes, I've seen it.
And he said that one of the uses for him is to sort of assist the students as peer reviewers in their work. So not necessarily writing the essay for them, but giving them feedback on their essay.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I'm using them in the same way, and I guess most of us that work in academia, we are using them, and we are using them as a first revision
Yes, exactly.
before.
Pretend you are a reviewer.
Exactly. But the idea is exactly that. So the nice thing about thinking in terms of active inference and thinking in terms of Montessori is we are generative models as well. So we have to learn, and our learning means, on the one hand, of course, we have to learn how to check what they do and to be sure that's factually correct. If you want to, I mean, we can decide still to write a complete nonsense paper and to have it. And second, we have to make more precise our own generative model. And you can't do that if you don't act. And the only way to act with an artificial intelligence is using it. There is no other way. You can't learn from books, you can't learn from podcasts, you can't. The only way in which you can do it is doing it. Now I will very likely, so I will start implementation in a school about neuroscience and neurobiology with kids, 4E and active inference, informed, so to say. But I have already talked with the teachers and so on. I want to start to use with the kids. We are talking about between first and sixth grade to use ChatGPT to to teach them how to use is to make them aware that they sometimes might make up things. And yeah.
Yes, okay, yeah, good, nice. Okay, well, I think we were covered the topic. The last one thing I wanted to ask you about is yourself, because you had a pretty unique path in science, right?
I hope I haven't disappointed you too much with
No, not at all.
my... Yes, I have a very pretty complicated thing. I started from philosophy studying Marx and this kind of stuff. And then I moved to
Studying what?
Marx. Marx and
Marx.
political
Marx.
philosophy.
Somehow
Yes,
I was
Marx,
thinking
Marx.
about grades, you know.
No.
Marx. Yeah, okay. No,
Yes.
that's.
And then I moved to political philosophy
Hmm.
in general. Then I moved to German philosophy, Hegel, Heidegger, these kind of things. But
And
they,
what drove you into these directions?
I don't know, I had a curiosity again, exploration. That was my embedding. I had just to really explore. And then at some point I left university. I started to work in cinema. Then I went back.
Cinema.
Yes, and then I went back and but as a costumist, so
Uh-huh.
completely different things. Um, I went back and I fell in love with history of science. So my first
Huh.
bachelor is actually in history of science. Then I fell in love with biology. So I moved to philosophy of biology. And in the meantime, I started to study also paleoanthropology and animal behavior, neuroscience, this kind of stuff. So I did my first PhD from philosophy, paleoanthropology, and animal behavior,
Mm-hmm.
sort of. But mainly working on social learning. I've always been interested in learning, somehow social learning and learning in general, the difference between us and apes. That's
Mm-hmm.
the reason my children became sort of interesting point. Then I moved to Germany. I started to work at the Private Center and the LICO, and for a couple of years, then for personal reasons, custody issues, and so on. I got stuck here and I started to work in a completely different field. I work in a cultural association. I still do it in a cultural association, and I work and organize a bar. We have a bar. That's the reason why I know a lot about glasses.
I see. Okay.
That's it. Very and but the call was a little bit too strong, and I wanted
Mm.
to go back to do research. So I started to work again. Then I saw this amazing, the Escape project. If you don't know it, it's a 10 million euros European project in which we work between us in Sussex, and then there is a group with, so us in Sussex with Andy Clark, then there is another group in archaeology in Santiago de Compostela with Felipe Criado Boanza, neuroscience with Luis Martinez in Alicante, and then in Kiel in Germany, there is also neuroscience and archaeology with Johannes Müller.
Huh.
It's an amazing project about the role of artifacts for the mind, for construction of mental
I see. I
models.
see. So it's very interdisciplinary.
It's very interdisciplinary. I'm working in this very moment, I'm working on Montessori material in development and in general extended mind. We are working on ambient smart technology. I have a paper, first draft of a paper on the Rubik's Cube for social learning and
Hmm.
cultural learning. We are working on tool making activities of early on. So you name it, we have it.
So I'm just constantly thinking like, what is the connecting line of all of these things? You know? Other than exploration, because exploration, yeah, it's nice. We are all like probably score very high on openness, but
the
which
collecting,
direction, you know?
the collecting light. I think it's what I said before. I've always thought in terms of learning, and also like very philosophical questions like, who are you? Who am I? And at some point you learn that you are very much in your embeddings. You are very much in the space, and everything that surrounds you can be a mirror of yourself, can be a chain, can be a memory, can be something that you simply use and need. Uh, and have anyway a certain power. And this is something that I started to think like, I think years ago. Um, Also, when you think about problems like addiction, all these kind of problems are very much connected with where you live, how is your like surrounding, how it looks like, which kind of feedbacks you wake up in the morning. And I've always thought like everything that surrounds me feedbacks on me. I wake up and I want to be sure that my environment is my environment, that I have the constant feedback for the person I want to be, for
I
the
see.
person that I desire to be. So for me, talking in terms of artifacts, I think the artifacts, the object, the environment, they have a real effective power that's not just it would be very stupid not to take into account. So I
And so you,
guess
you sort of like consciously think about what artifacts you surround yourself with?
I do. But we do all the time. Do you
Hmm.
have your books organized, or do you just leave them like this when they are in the right shelf, not when they are here waiting to be?
My books, yeah, I moved a lot, so my books are sort of like always in the same sort of container, but most of the time I'm reading on Kindle today, so my books are organized in my phone.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yes.
recently read books, yeah.
Yes, but it's the same. You
Yeah.
have your little folders, how you organize your folders, on Google
So,
Drive.
but I'm not sure I'm very conscious about them, the things
I
that
think
surround
we
me. Yeah.
should be. We should be a lot more, because
Mm.
when you are not conscious, um, the work of Ersmink, I mentioned it before. I think his papers are really masterpiece. They are very beautiful,
Mm.
very nice to read. And one of them is about distributed memory,
Mhm.
memorabilia in general.
Mm.
Sometimes we have them like, how do we classify, how do we put them, where are in our spaces, right?
Mm.
Sometimes we have them in a specific box. Okay, these are my memories with all the things of 20 years ago, bad and not, and good all together,
I have
maybe.
that one.
uh, or sometimes we have together with something else, like, I don't
Yeah.
know, cups that reminds you a specific moment in time. But while you are using the cup, it doesn't remind you. So it is not that you are thinking all the time when you are using the cup at that specific time. But I am 100% sure that if that memory, that specific cup is connected with, it's a bad memory, at some point will come up.
Ah.
And that is the reason why I do remember when I started to think in this way. I had an ex boyfriend, and at some point I took all the letters and memories, and they said, okay, I have simply to trash them because they are here. It doesn't matter that I can hide them. I know that they are there. And till they are there, I will always think that they are there, and they don't want to think it. And there
Hmm.
is just a way. But for me, I don't know. We have all these kind of little things like cleaning the office before starting a new project. Why?
Ah.
Cleaning the office means cleaning your mind, means is actually cleaning your mind, is making space.
I see. Okay. So you had a child between your two PhDs, and I want to ask you how this, what do you
Worked
think
out.
about having a child changed who you were and what you wanted to do?
Well, I can tell you with this, it's called the problem of the Z. So my child started primary school in the period of Corona. And since it
Uh-huh.
was already a very complicated period, they didn't put it even more complicated in looking for the perfect school, because was a mess, let's be honest. But for the whole period of Corona, at least in Germany, children would go to school every other day. So they would anyway go to school in presence, but they would split the classroom in two. And one group would go on Monday, one group on Tuesday, and so on and forth. And this worked out pretty nicely for the first 6 months. I think, no, for 5 months. Then at some point, my daughter Elisabetta and a friend, they came home and they told me, both of them, 6 years old, we hate the Z. Like very serious, as 6 years old only can be. And I started to think, how is it possible to hate a letter? Doesn't make sense to me. Doesn't make sense. So I started to look at what they were studying and how they were studying. And for me, I realized that there were lots of problems. Most importantly, as I told you, I have studied learning for, at this point, around about 20 years in different, across species,
Yes.
okay?
And
I'm pretty
ignorance, you.
open-minded. And it looks to me completely absurd that everything that we know about learning, it's not implemented, it's not even mentioned in schools. Like, what's the when you study culture, the so-called culture evolution, when you study the so-called ratchet effect, when you study all these kind of ideas, what's the main information? We are imitators par excellence. This is what we do. We imitate each other. Children imitate adults, even if they don't understand what they are doing, they tend to imitate them. It's called over-imitation. Then you emulate your peers, the people that are older than you, and you select very nicely who to imitate, who to emulate, and all these things is completely absent in schools.
I see, yeah. Okay.
Completely absent.
But you can have good teachers you can imitate, no?
You can't really imitate a teacher if everything it's based on a verbal communication. It's very hard
Oh.
because imitation is it has to solve what is being called the triangulation problem. When you imitate, you have I am specular to you. So
Yeah,
what
what?
means I am specular to you, right? So I'm imitating you. You are the teacher, you're talking to me, and I want to imitate you. You raise your right hand. I have to understand that I have to raise the right hand or the left hand. In one case, I'm aping you or literally mirroring you. In the other case, is imitating. But this is kind of a complex problem. It's not so easy. And most of our imitations, particularly, is for things that are bodily enacted and embodied,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
to say, particularly at very young age. Of
Ah, I
course,
see.
do
Oh.
also.
So I haven't thought about this. So you mean like in because I completely agree with you. I recently came to this conclusion that like debates or all those kind of things when people want to convince others are completely useless, except if in the sense that you aspire to become as one of the persons in the debate, and you want to be like him. So you like the arguments because you
Do
can
you remember
repeat
that
them.
this is a very old essay of Sigmund Freud, right?
No, I don't. Tell me.
Yes, it's a very old essay. I said at some point Sigmund Freud writes fantastically, but it's an essay. It's called, I'm thinking in Italian now, Psicologia del masse, analisi dell'io, psychology of populations, I think, analysis of the I. But I
Uh-huh.
don't know what's the English translation because I think I've read it like 50, 20 maybe years ago. And it's about exactly like asking how people could vote for someone like Benito Mussolini
Mm-hmm.
because somehow they wanted to be
Him.
Silvio
Yeah.
Berlusconi. That
Yeah.
how can be voted for 20 years because he's bold, was bold and small, and he was extremely rich, and people that were not particularly successful in life, they might have wanted to be like him. But this is like it's way more advanced thing compared to the basic imitations that I
Mm-hmm.
think that works and in children should work in schools. It should be the first thing that the first thing that schools should allow is copying. Allow kids to copy. Copy is it
Mm-hmm.
looks like that you are like about to go to jail if you copy, but the copying is the first mechanism that we use for
Mm-hmm.
learning things
Mm-hmm.
socially. So all these kind of things made me thinking, okay, I definitely want to look into schools.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know,
In your research.
yes, in my
Mm-hmm.
research. It's like, you know, why in schools we start with the alphabet? Makes no sense. Makes no sense. We don't, when kids arrive to school, they understand the narrative, it's called. They understand that there is a plot, they understand stories, they understand characters, they understand that there is something happening,
Mm-hmm.
they understand the stuff, they have images, they have already a meaning connected with some words.
Mm-hmm.
And you put all of these on the side and say, now we start with A. Why? Why, for the God's sake? Why? It makes no sense.
Because I mean, you can read at the end. I mean,
But you
my
could read
choice.
also if someone would use your ability to understand graphics, for instance, and you could simply copy words. You don't have to.
Mm.
What schools do is teaching what I don't know the general schools. I mean, for what I could see so far in across languages, it's building a new semantic in your cognitive system. The new
Mm-hmm.
semantic is connecting different words that are completely detached in real life,
Mm-hmm.
connecting them around a letter,
Mm-hmm.
right? So all the words that start with A, and
Yeah.
you have these, you have to memorize, but it's just memory. Doesn't have anything to do with learning. Learning means a completely different thing. Learning, you learn when something goes from your working memory till your long-term storage.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens when it makes sense, when it's connected with a meaning. But you have already the meaning. Why do you have to delete the meaning and trying to put another one completely put from outside? That, of course,
Mm.
for kids is completely, I think it's just an insane waste of time. We could teach the alphabet. You can just teach at the end of the first year instead of
Ah.
first that they teach.
Okay. Yeah.
Ah,
I think that. I mean, yeah. These are the things that nobody questions. Actually,
yes.
it's for because they want the kids to read, so they can sort of make like outsourced learning. You can read it now. I don't have to
My
explain it to
daughter,
you.
we went to we live in Germany. She's trilingual. She speaks Italian, German,
Uh-huh.
and English. And we went last November to the UK. She went for 1 month because I wanted to stay for some time in my office, really. And she went for 1 month to school there. And at the end of the month, we came back to Germany. And then she looked at me, she told me, Mama, how is it possible that I can read English? Because nobody has ever taught me.
Ah,
And I
that's
thought, yeah,
interesting.
I did teach you.
Ah, I
Just
see.
you didn't know. You can teach. You can teach because children that they are 6, they can understand your gestures. So I used the gestures when I was reading in English, signing underneath each word. They can understand pictures. So every word is in fact a picture. So some
Mhm.
letters are higher, some letters are lower. This is things that they can understand. They understand plots. So you
Mm.
can make them copying a sentence. They do copy, they can do collaboratively. There are thousands of ways. I mean, I am not right now looking at these, but theoretically there are thousands of ways. That's the reason why I ended up in working in
I see, I see.
education.
Okay, well, thank you,
I hope
Laura.
I
Hmm?
haven't made
No, no, no,
you
it's,
talk a
it's
lot.
beautiful. Uh, Usually at the end of the discussion, I ask my guests to ask me one question.
Yes, embodied AI. When can I read it?
I think my co-author put it on archive today, but I'll ask him.
Well, send it to me, please. No, seriously.
Okay, I think it will be very basic for you. It's because it's mainly for the AI community to argue that that should be the direction we put more research in.
But what you mean with embodied in which sense? Embodied your embodiment toward the artificial intelligence or the other way around? Because both ways is very interesting, but
But I would say that my motivation to do this is partly related to my journey
Mhm.
towards embodiment, because I come from a very cerebral way of living, and it came pretty much last 5-10 years that I realized how important the body is, especially I'm getting older, so body starts to send you signs that I exist. But even beyond that, like some practices made me realize how cognition relates to what I do with my body. I started to do martial art. We talked before I turned on recording that I started it like 3 years ago. I was 51, the oldest one and the greenest one in the dojo. And it was really, really hard in the beginning. Now I'm getting it took me 2.5 years to actually start to enjoy it, in the sense that, like,
what you're doing, did I understand correctly? You do jujitsu,
Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Japanese.
So
Okay.
that's like the mother of everything.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
it's partly judo, partly karate, like kicking, hitting, and also the Brazilian jiu-jitsu is a branch of this for the
for the
groundwork, let's say. So it's basically Japanese self-defense of the samurais, the original one. So it's very overall, and it's a lot of things that I was very afraid of, like falling, getting my head below my body, so turning, rolling around. And these things made me, and when when they throw you, I was thrown first time in judo. That's pretty scary. I was hanging on like a baby. It's exactly what you should not do. It was so, but it's at the same time it's such an interesting learning. And when I get into a free fight,
Mhm.
that taught me a lot. It's almost like a dance, and it teaches me about how to be with myself and with the environment at the same time. And I
I'm
could,
wondering, have
yeah,
you ever tried, you're in Paris, you told me, right?
yeah,
You should try Sistema.
sistema.
Sistema is a Russian martial art, but independently on the origins that might look scary, it has a very, it gives you two important information. First, the ability to feel your body in every single part. If it's done correctly, you learn to breathe and you learn to detach and to use, to contract every single muscle independently on each other. The second, it allows you to feel, involving to feel the pain. You are never trying to escape for the pain. You are learning to absorb it. And this, I practiced different martial arts, and in my opinion, this was the ones that taught me the most in terms of embodied. Yes, you should check it out.
Yeah, no, yeah. So that was one of the elements of my journey through embodiment. But I also do cold water, like ice water, and so meditation comes very easily to me because it's very cerebral. It's basically leaving
I
stuff.
see that me and you, we are the opposite spectrum. Meditation to me is a torture.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah. But at the same time, it's I'm probably not doing it in the right way, but it's very easy to get disembodied in meditation, you know. And I know this is not the official goal of it, but I see a lot of people getting into the direction, and it's easy. And you know, getting rid of the ego, sort of way, like dissolving into reality. But when you're sitting in zero degree water, and you are actually bound to that thing that comes into your body, and then meditate, you know, that's the most interesting stuff. So I don't forget my body in zero degree water.
No,
you can't. If you do, so you die basically. You have to remember your body, but you also die if you get tensed up. So you do have to relax. So that's the two things you have to do when you're in zero degree water, and then you can stay. My record is like 25 minutes. I was crazy, but for like 5 minutes you can easily stay in ice cold water and you're okay. And so these kind of things like led me to think more about embodiment. And that's, you know, the reason I ask you why, you know, did what you did is because it really affected me on my research. So this is why I got more interested in embodied AI. It's just to connect a little bit to what I do with you know, who I am.
Yeah, I was thinking, but so for going back, there are two ways to see embodiment in artificial intelligence. One way, I have the feeling that, so this is like, it's more a question, because I have the feeling that we are so scared of things that look disembodied that we don't realize that we are actually embodied every time we interact with an artificial intelligence. We are embodied even in just pushing
Typing.
yes, typing or going with the mouse or using okay Google. I mean, sorry, now I have activated more. So using all these devices, we are embodied. We do with our body. I was talking with a friend, and we have this. He made the example of the keys that you don't have to for opening the car. You just go toward the car, and the car opens. And I said, well, but at some point will arrive the point in which you don't want the car to open. So you will learn to do an action that avoids the car to open when you are going anyway in that direction, right?
Yes.
Because this is what is going to happen, like the printer that never prints when you need it. So what do you think in these terms and the kind of embodiment that we use and when we deal with artificial intelligence?
Well, so obviously one of the directions is robotics,
Yes.
which is which faces these issues. Putting AI into robots, it's not an easy task. But what we did in the paper is try to extend the notion of embodiment, because I'm working in telecommunications. And in telecommunications, you have like an antenna, a Wi-Fi antenna, that is not embodied in the 3D mechanical sense, but it does live in a space where it senses stuff and it does stuff and it has some goals. Of course, it's not going to be like thermodynamically separated from its environment. So you have those kind of properties of a living organisms that you don't have in a Wi-Fi antenna, but it does have some of the notions of agency, of acting on the world.
Yes.
And not only to optimize something, but also to learn.
It's in line with the work of Malafouris, the material engagement theory. You don't know it?
No.
That's super interesting because we are working on that. So I might suggest it because I have the book here. But in general, it's
I see.
the material engagement theory is the idea that there is agency. This is also what we are working on somehow. There is agentiality in the objects, in the artifacts themselves. Because, as I told you, they shape my environment. If I leave them here around,
Precisely, yeah.
yes, they shape me. And I have the ability, otherwise than them, to decide if I want to, most of the time, not always. But when you make, I don't know, I paint, but colors kind of feedback against my desire to them to do what I want, right? So they have a form of agentiality. Sometimes I think to paint something simply because I buy some colors that are particularly interesting, or I see a stone that I really want to craft.
Yeah, so this kind of thing. So even like if you go into learning theory, the basic paradigm that we actually, even if somebody doesn't work on theory, the language we use in machine learning is based on this paradigm where data comes from an outside oracle. We don't know how, we don't care. It comes from a distribution, it's drawn randomly, and we learn a function based on this data, which is obviously not how we learn. Like data is not coming from an outside oracle. It comes because we go after the data, and as you say, it's even the environment that we generate the data is changed by us. So there is this feedback loop, which is a little bit present in reinforcement learning, but still sort of like rooted in this statistical framework where you don't really work with the data generation as a concept in your theory. So I think that and this goes very far, because the whole language, the whole algorithmic structure is embedded into that theory. So that's why LLMs are so alienated, because they are based on that theory.
Yes.
And of course, I mean, it's not to diminish the technical algorithmic engineering knowledge that went into LLMs. It's just saying that if we want to have agents that we can communicate with, we can embed, we can align them, they can be our friends somehow. They have to be embodied in one way or another. So this is basically it's a position paper, which we usually, it's rare that we write position papers in machine learning. We usually like technical papers, right? So it's sort of like more of a program than something we claim to be true. It's more like something we claim to be
Possible,
that
right?
want. Yeah.
We want,
It's possible. Yeah.
That's it would be really, really interesting. I've always thought when we started to write this paper, that was my first idea, because I had discussed a lot about that's the reason why I called them entities. I don't know if you've read the papers of Chalmers, the latest one, if it's possible to consider understanding without sensomotor interaction.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they are right now because I think they are very, very young. The LLMs, the LLMs are
Yeah.
very young. But it is not so hard for me to foresee a not too far future in which you combine things
No, that's
with
true.
enough,
I agree. I agree.
in which you have a multisensory information stream that comes from different levels and is combined with the same processing that is working in LLMs. I mean,
Yes, I mean the only thing is that I don't think it's going to be as fast as people
no.
think because of the physical systems break. Basically, if you work with robots, they fall, they break. It takes a month to repair them and 10,000 euros. So it's
I
not.
still remember the first dog of Boston Dynamics. It was a pity to see.
Yeah, and you see these robots, you see that they are like in jujitsu, like they have to learn to fall first, otherwise you always have to repair them. It's
Fantastic.
precisely the same process.
Yes. Well, we could start from that, building robots that do martial arts, and the first thing that they have to learn is falling.
They have pillows and stuff, so they don't break the expensive
Yes,
stuff.
exactly.
Okay, well, it's what, 2 hours.
Yes. I didn't shut up for 1 minute.
No, it's okay. I mean, it was very nice. So thank you very much, Laura. I will definitely recontact you for all the references that you
Yes,
mentioned
yes.
during the conversation.
Yes, yes, of course.
And thank you very much for sharing
Thank you
this
very
with
much for
me.
having invited me. And I honestly think that if you want to have a serious conversation about, in general, active inference and the relationship between active inference and the 4E account of cognition, a person to contact is, without any doubt, Ben White.
Okay.
I will send you his name later if you want by mail, but
Okay,
he's
thank you very
definitely
much.
the
Yeah, this is
person.
how this podcast is constructed, actually. I love this.
He has a couple of papers now going on. We are working together on ambient smart environments, meta affordances, and a bunch of stuff that I think will be very much interesting for you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Laura.
It was a pleasure, and I see you very soon. And a nice evening.
Thank you. Bye
Bye.
bye. Bye.